Question 1. Consider a scenario where a client in Boise, Idaho, is selling an investment property and asks their real estate broker for specific advice on how much capital gains tax they will owe and how depreciation recapture will affect their net proceeds, based on Idaho's tax regulations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Idaho licensed real estate broker? Option A. Explain that while the broker can provide general information about how capital gains and depreciation are typically treated in real estate transactions under Idaho law, they cannot provide specific tax advice, and strongly recommend the client consult with a qualified tax professional, such as a CPA or enrolled agent, for personalized guidance. Option B. Calculate the estimated capital gains tax and depreciation recapture for the client by applying general Idaho tax rates and depreciation rules, as this is a common aspect of real estate transactions. Option C. Provide a detailed breakdown of the client's potential tax liability, including specific figures for capital gains and depreciation recapture, based on the broker's understanding of Idaho's tax code. Option D. Advise the client that they can likely defer all capital gains tax by immediately reinvesting the sale proceeds into another investment property within Idaho. The correct answer is A. Explain that while the broker can provide general information about how capital gains and depreciation are typically treated in real estate transactions under Idaho law, they cannot provide specific tax advice, and strongly recommend the client consult with a qualified tax professional, such as a CPA or enrolled agent, for personalized guidance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Idaho real estate broker because it requires navigating the complex interplay between real estate transactions and Idaho's tax laws, specifically concerning capital gains and depreciation recapture. A broker's advice directly impacts a client's financial outcome, necessitating a thorough understanding of tax implications beyond just the property's market value. Failure to provide accurate guidance can lead to significant financial detriment for the client and potential professional liability for the broker. The challenge lies in distinguishing between general real estate advice and specific tax advice, which often requires specialized knowledge and licensing. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the broker clearly advising the client that while they can provide information on how real estate transactions are generally taxed in Idaho, including concepts like capital gains and depreciation recapture, they cannot provide specific tax advice. The broker should then strongly recommend that the client consult with a qualified tax professional, such as a certified public accountant, CPA, or an enrolled agent, licensed in Idaho, to discuss their individual tax situation and receive personalized advice. This approach is correct because Idaho real estate brokers are licensed to facilitate real estate transactions, not to provide tax advice. Providing specific tax advice without proper licensing or expertise constitutes the unauthorized practice of law or accounting, which is a violation of Idaho's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. Recommending a qualified tax professional ensures the client receives accurate and compliant tax guidance. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising the client on the exact amount of capital gains tax they will owe and the specific depreciation recapture they will face, based on the broker's own understanding of Idaho tax law, is an incorrect approach. This constitutes providing specific tax advice, which falls outside the scope of a real estate broker's license in Idaho and could be considered the unauthorized practice of accounting or law. Estimating the client's tax liability by simply applying a standard capital gains tax rate without considering individual circumstances or specific Idaho tax code nuances is also an incorrect approach. While seemingly helpful, it is still a form of tax advice that the broker is not qualified to give and can lead to inaccurate financial planning for the client. Suggesting that the client can avoid all capital gains tax by reinvesting the proceeds into another Idaho property, without understanding the specific IRS and Idaho tax code provisions for such deferrals, like 1031 exchanges, and the client's eligibility, is an incorrect and potentially misleading approach. This oversimplifies complex tax strategies and could lead the client to make decisions that result in unexpected tax liabilities. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Idaho should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes their scope of practice and client well-being. When faced with questions that border on specialized advice, like tax, legal, or financial planning, The first step is to identify whether the inquiry falls within their licensing and expertise. If it does not, the professional must clearly communicate their limitations to the client. The next critical step is to recommend that the client seek advice from a licensed and qualified professional in the relevant field. This ensures the client receives accurate, compliant, and personalized guidance, while the professional avoids potential legal and ethical repercussions. Maintaining clear boundaries and fostering collaboration with other professionals is key to ethical practice. Question 2. Upon reviewing a client's financial situation and stated goals for purchasing a property in Idaho, a licensed real estate broker needs to discuss the general characteristics of different mortgage types. Which of the following approaches best educates the client while adhering to Idaho's regulatory framework for real estate professionals? Option A. Explain the fundamental differences between fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, detailing their general payment structures and potential implications, and advise the client to consult with a licensed mortgage professional for personalized recommendations. Option B. Provide a detailed analysis of the client's debt-to-income ratio and credit score to determine which specific mortgage product would be most suitable for their financial profile. Option C. Recommend an adjustable-rate mortgage as the most advantageous option for the client, highlighting the potential for lower initial payments and suggesting it aligns with their desire for short-term cost savings. Option D. Advise the client that an interest-only mortgage is the ideal choice for maximizing their immediate cash flow, without discussing the long-term repayment obligations or the need for future principal reduction. The correct answer is A. Explain the fundamental differences between fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages, detailing their general payment structures and potential implications, and advise the client to consult with a licensed mortgage professional for personalized recommendations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Idaho to accurately advise a client on mortgage types without engaging in unlicensed financial advice. The broker must understand the fundamental differences between fixed-rate, adjustable-rate, and interest-only mortgages to guide the client's understanding, but must avoid making specific recommendations or providing financial planning services, which fall outside the scope of a real estate license. The challenge lies in balancing helpful client education with strict adherence to regulatory boundaries. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves educating the client on the general characteristics and implications of each mortgage type, empowering them to make an informed decision in consultation with a qualified mortgage professional. This approach involves clearly explaining that a fixed-rate mortgage offers predictable monthly payments for the life of the loan. An adjustable-rate mortgage may have initial lower payments that can change over time based on market conditions, and an interest-only mortgage allows for lower initial payments that only cover interest, with the principal balance remaining unchanged until later in the loan term. This aligns with Idaho's real estate licensing laws, which permit brokers to provide general information about property and financing options, but prohibit them from offering financial advice or acting as mortgage brokers without the appropriate licenses. The broker's role is to facilitate understanding of the product types, not to select or recommend a specific product for the client. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending a specific mortgage type based on the client's stated financial goals, without the client having consulted a licensed mortgage loan originator or financial advisor, constitutes providing unlicensed financial advice. This violates Idaho's regulations governing real estate brokers and potentially Idaho's mortgage lending laws, as it steps beyond the scope of a real estate license into financial planning. Suggesting that an interest-only mortgage is always the best option for someone looking to maximize cash flow, without a comprehensive understanding of the client's long-term financial situation and risk tolerance, is also problematic. This oversimplification can lead to significant financial risk for the client if they are unable to manage the principal repayment later in the loan term. Furthermore, advising the client that an adjustable-rate mortgage is inherently superior due to potentially lower initial payments, without fully explaining the risks of future payment increases and the impact of market fluctuations, is a failure to provide complete and balanced information, potentially misleading the client. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centered educational approach that respects regulatory boundaries. When discussing mortgage options, the decision-making framework should prioritize clear, factual explanations of each product's features and general implications. The broker should always emphasize the importance of consulting with licensed mortgage professionals for personalized advice and product selection. This ensures the client receives accurate, tailored guidance while the broker remains compliant with their licensing obligations. Question 3. When evaluating a residential property for a potential seller in Boise, Idaho, what is the most responsible and ethically sound approach for a licensed real estate broker to take to determine its optimal market positioning? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive comparative market analysis, CMA, that includes detailed research on recent sales of similar properties, current market inventory, local economic indicators, and an assessment of the property's unique features and potential for value enhancement. Option B. Advise the seller on a listing price based primarily on the seller's personal financial needs and desired timeline for the sale, regardless of current market conditions. Option C. Recommend a listing price significantly below the estimated market value to generate multiple immediate offers and expedite the sale process. Option D. Base the suggested listing price on the broker's personal experience and intuition about what similar properties have historically sold for in the neighborhood. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive comparative market analysis, CMA, that includes detailed research on recent sales of similar properties, current market inventory, local economic indicators, and an assessment of the property's unique features and potential for value enhancement. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because a real estate broker in Idaho must balance the client's desire for a quick sale with their fiduciary duty to ensure the client makes an informed decision based on sound investment principles. Rushing the analysis without proper due diligence can lead to a sale that is not in the client's best financial interest, potentially violating Idaho's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing priorities. The best approach involves conducting a comprehensive comparative market analysis, CMA, that goes beyond simple price comparisons. This includes a thorough evaluation of the property's physical condition, potential for renovation or improvement, and an assessment of the local market trends, including recent sales of comparable properties, current inventory levels, and projected future demand. This detailed analysis provides the seller with a realistic understanding of the property's market value and potential return on investment, enabling them to set an appropriate asking price and make informed decisions about any necessary repairs or staging. This aligns with Idaho's requirement for brokers to act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interest of their clients, as outlined in Idaho Code Title 54, Chapter 29, which governs real estate practices and mandates professional conduct. An approach that focuses solely on the seller's desired price without substantiating it with market data is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the broker's duty to provide accurate and informed advice, potentially leading the seller to overprice the property and hinder a sale, or, conversely, to underprice it and lose potential profit. This contravenes the ethical obligation to represent the client's interests diligently and truthfully. Another unacceptable approach is to prioritize speed of sale above all else, suggesting a price significantly below market value simply to attract immediate offers. While a quick sale might be a client's preference, a broker cannot ethically recommend a price that demonstrably undervalues the property without a clear and documented understanding with the seller that this is their explicit instruction, and they comprehend the financial implications. This disregards the broker's fiduciary duty to maximize the client's financial gain within legal and ethical bounds. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the broker's personal opinion of what the property should sell for, without rigorous market research, is also professionally unsound. Real estate investment analysis requires objective data and systematic evaluation, not subjective guesswork. This lack of a data-driven approach undermines the credibility of the broker's advice and fails to meet the professional standards expected in Idaho. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's goals, followed by a commitment to thorough, data-driven analysis. This involves gathering all relevant market information, assessing the property's unique characteristics, and then presenting a clear, objective, and well-supported recommendation to the client. Transparency and open communication are paramount throughout the process, ensuring the client is empowered to make informed decisions based on a realistic understanding of their property's investment potential. Question 4. The analysis reveals that a real estate broker in Boise, Idaho, representing a seller, has been informed by a contractor of a significant, previously undisclosed structural issue with the property that will require substantial repair. The seller has instructed the broker not to mention this issue to any potential buyers, stating it is a private matter between them and the contractor. What is the most appropriate course of action for the broker under Idaho real estate law? Option A. Proceed with marketing and selling the property without disclosing the structural issue, adhering strictly to the seller's instructions to maintain client confidentiality. Option B. Inform the seller that they will not proceed with the listing unless the seller agrees to disclose the structural issue, effectively withdrawing from the representation. Option C. Advise the seller that the structural issue is a material fact that must be disclosed to potential buyers according to Idaho law, and explain the legal and ethical consequences of non-disclosure, while seeking the seller's agreement to disclose. Option D. Disclose the structural issue to potential buyers immediately without further discussion with the seller, prioritizing transparency above all else. The correct answer is C. Advise the seller that the structural issue is a material fact that must be disclosed to potential buyers according to Idaho law, and explain the legal and ethical consequences of non-disclosure, while seeking the seller's agreement to disclose. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Idaho to navigate the delicate balance between client confidentiality and the legal obligation to disclose material facts. The broker has received information that, if revealed, could significantly impact the sale price and the buyer's decision, but the seller has explicitly instructed them not to disclose it. This creates a conflict between fiduciary duties to the seller and the broader duty to deal honestly and fairly with all parties in a transaction, as mandated by Idaho real estate law. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and avoid legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves advising the seller that the information is a material fact and must be disclosed to potential buyers, even if the seller prefers otherwise. This approach is correct because Idaho law, specifically through the Idaho Real Estate License Law and Commission rules, imposes a duty on licensees to disclose all material facts that could affect a buyer's decision or the value of the property. Material facts are defined broadly and include conditions that could impact the property's desirability or value. By informing the seller of this legal obligation and the potential consequences of non-disclosure, including liability for the broker and seller, the broker upholds their fiduciary duty to the seller by acting within legal and ethical boundaries, while also fulfilling their duty to the buyer and the public to ensure a fair transaction. This proactive communication and adherence to legal requirements protect all parties and the broker's license. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to disclose the information to the buyer and proceeding with the sale as instructed by the seller is a direct violation of Idaho's real estate laws. This constitutes a failure to disclose a material fact, which can lead to disciplinary action by the Idaho Real Estate Commission, including license suspension or revocation, fines, and potential civil liability for misrepresentation or fraud. Breaches the duty to deal honestly and fairly with all parties. Disclosing the information to the buyer without first discussing it with the seller and obtaining their consent, or at least informing them of the intent to disclose, while seemingly transparent, could be seen as a breach of the fiduciary duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the seller. While disclosure is ultimately required, the manner of disclosure is important. The broker should first attempt to persuade the seller to disclose, or at least inform them of the broker's legal obligation to do so. Withholding the information from both the seller and the buyer, hoping the issue will not arise or be discovered, is also a failure to act in good faith and violates the duty to disclose material facts. This passive approach does not absolve the broker of their legal responsibilities and can still lead to severe consequences if the information is later discovered. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Idaho real estate should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a conflict between a client's instructions and legal disclosure requirements, the broker must first identify the nature of the information. Is it a material fact? If it is, the broker's primary obligation is to the law. The professional approach involves clear, direct communication with the seller, explaining the legal mandate for disclosure and the potential ramifications of non-disclosure. The broker should document these conversations. If the seller remains unwilling to disclose, the broker must then inform the seller that they are legally obligated to disclose the material fact to potential buyers, even if it means the transaction may not proceed. This process ensures that the broker acts with integrity, protects their license, and upholds the integrity of the real estate market in Idaho. Question 5. Compliance review shows that an Idaho licensed real estate broker, representing the seller, becomes aware of a significant foundation issue in the property shortly after listing it. The broker knows this defect could materially affect the property's value and desirability. The broker is eager to facilitate a quick sale for their client. Which of the following approaches best upholds the broker's professional and legal obligations in Idaho? Option A. Immediately and fully disclose the known foundation issue to the potential buyer and their agent in writing. Option B. Minimize the severity of the foundation issue when discussing it with the buyer or their agent. Option C. Wait until the buyer's professional inspection to disclose the foundation issue. Option D. Advise the seller to repair the foundation issue discreetly before the buyer's inspection, without disclosing the original problem. The correct answer is A. Immediately and fully disclose the known foundation issue to the potential buyer and their agent in writing. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a broker to balance the fiduciary duty owed to their client with the legal and ethical obligations to disclose material facts. The pressure to close a deal quickly can sometimes lead to overlooking or downplaying critical information that could impact the buyer's decision. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of Idaho's real estate disclosure laws and ethical standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a proactive and transparent approach to disclosure. This means the Idaho licensed broker should immediately and fully disclose the known foundation issue to the potential buyer and their agent in writing as soon as it is discovered. This aligns with Idaho's statutory requirements for disclosing material defects and the ethical obligations of honesty and fair dealing inherent in the real estate profession. Prompt written disclosure protects the buyer's right to make an informed decision and shields the broker from potential liability for misrepresentation or failure to disclose. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to disclose the foundation issue until the buyer's inspection is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This approach violates Idaho's requirement to disclose known material defects promptly. It deprives the buyer of crucial information early in the negotiation process, potentially leading to wasted time and resources for both parties if the issue is a deal breaker. It also exposes the seller and the broker to claims of concealment. Attempting to downplay the severity of the foundation issue to the buyer or their agent is also a serious breach. Idaho law mandates the disclosure of material facts, and minimizing a known defect constitutes a form of misrepresentation. This erodes trust and violates the broker's duty of honesty. Such an action could lead to disciplinary action by the Idaho Real Estate Commission and potential legal action from the buyer. Suggesting the seller fix it quietly before the buyer's inspection without disclosing the original problem is deceptive. While a seller has the right to make repairs, failing to disclose that material defect existed and was repaired is a form of concealment. The buyer has a right to know about past material issues, even if they have been addressed, as it can impact their perception of the property's long-term stability and value. This approach circumvents the spirit and letter of Idaho's disclosure laws. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize transparency and adherence to legal and ethical mandates. When faced with a potential material defect, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the nature of the defect and its potential impact on the property's value or desirability. 2. Consulting Idaho's real estate statutes and rules regarding disclosure obligations. 3. Communicating the defect clearly and promptly in writing to all relevant parties, including the client and the other party's agent. 4. Documenting all disclosures and communications. This systematic approach ensures compliance and upholds professional integrity. Question 6. When assisting a client in determining a competitive listing price for a standard single-family home in Boise, Idaho, which property valuation method is generally considered the most appropriate and ethically sound for providing a realistic market assessment? Option A. Income approach. Option B, cost approach. Option C, a combination of all three approaches without specific justification for each. Option D, comparative market analysis. Correct answer is D, comparative market analysis. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Idaho real estate broker because the chosen valuation method must accurately reflect the property's market value while adhering to Idaho's licensing laws and ethical standards. The broker must demonstrate competence in selecting the most appropriate valuation technique for the specific property type and market conditions, avoiding methods that could lead to misrepresentation or a failure to uphold fiduciary duties to the client. The challenge lies in understanding the nuances of each valuation approach and applying them judiciously to avoid potential legal and ethical repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the comparative market analysis, CMA. A CMA is a method used by real estate professionals to determine the value of a property by comparing it to similar properties that have recently sold in the same area. This approach is best suited for residential properties where there is a robust market with recent comparable sales. Idaho's real estate regulations, while not dictating a specific valuation method for every situation, emphasize the importance of providing accurate and informed opinions of value to clients. A CMA, when performed correctly with up-to-date and relevant comparable sales, aligns with the ethical obligation to act in the client's best interest by providing a realistic market assessment. It is a widely accepted practice within the industry for establishing a probable selling price. Incorrect approaches analysis. Using the income approach would be inappropriate and potentially misleading for a single-family residence that is not primarily an investment property. The income approach estimates value based on the potential income a property can generate, which is not the primary driver of value for a typical owner-occupied home. Relying on this method would fail to reflect the market realities and buyer motivations for such a property, potentially leading to an inaccurate valuation and a breach of professional duty. Employing the cost approach for an older, established residential property is also generally not the best practice. The cost approach estimates the cost to replace the property minus depreciation plus land value. For older homes, accurately estimating depreciation can be highly subjective and difficult, and the replacement cost may not reflect what a buyer is willing to pay in the current market. This method is more suitable for unique properties, new construction, or special-purpose buildings where comparable sales are scarce and income generation is not the primary factor. Using it for a standard residential property without strong justification would be a failure to apply a relevant and reliable valuation method. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Idaho should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes the most relevant and reliable valuation method for the specific property type and market conditions. This involves understanding the strengths and limitations of each approach. Comparative market analysis for active residential markets, income approach for income-producing properties, and cost approach for unique or new construction. The broker must exercise professional judgment, considering the purpose of the valuation, e.g., listing price, buyer's offer, the availability of data, and the client's needs. Adherence to Idaho's real estate laws and ethical codes, which mandate competence and honest representation, requires selecting the method that best supports an accurate and defensible opinion of value. Question 7. To address the challenge of advising clients in Idaho during periods of significant real estate market fluctuation, which of the following strategies best upholds professional ethics and regulatory compliance? Option A. Proactively educate clients about the inherent volatility of real estate markets, emphasizing long-term investment principles and individual financial goals over short-term trend prediction. Option B. Discourage clients from investing in real estate altogether due to perceived market downturns, regardless of their individual financial circumstances or long-term objectives. Option C. Selectively share only positive market indicators to encourage immediate client investment, downplaying any potential risks or negative trends. Option D. Leverage personal knowledge of impending market shifts to advise clients on specific property transactions that align with the broker's personal financial interests, framing it as expert market insight. The correct answer is A. Proactively educate clients about the inherent volatility of real estate markets, emphasizing long-term investment principles and individual financial goals over short-term trend prediction. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Idaho to navigate market fluctuations and advise clients ethically and legally, even when personal financial interests might be perceived to conflict with client best interests. The broker must balance providing accurate market insights with avoiding any actions that could be construed as market manipulation or insider trading, which are prohibited under Idaho real estate law and general ethical principles governing fiduciaries. Careful judgment is required to ensure all advice is objective and client-focused. The best professional approach involves proactively educating clients about the inherent volatility of real estate markets and the speculative nature of predicting short-term trends. This includes emphasizing that market shifts are influenced by numerous complex factors beyond any single individual's control or prediction. The broker should focus on long-term investment principles and the client's individual financial goals and risk tolerance, rather than attempting to time the market. This aligns with the Idaho real estate license law's emphasis on honesty, integrity, and acting in the best interest of the client. By providing a balanced perspective and managing client expectations realistically, the broker upholds their fiduciary duty and avoids potential ethical breaches. An approach that involves selectively sharing only positive market indicators to encourage immediate investment is professionally unacceptable. This misrepresents the market's true condition and violates the duty of full disclosure owed to clients. It could lead clients to make decisions based on incomplete or biased information, potentially resulting in financial harm and violating Idaho's real estate regulations that mandate truthful representation. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to leverage personal knowledge of impending market shifts to advise clients to buy or sell specific properties for personal gain, while presenting it as general market advice. This borders on insider trading and constitutes a conflict of interest, as the broker's personal benefit is prioritized over the client's best interest. Such actions undermine trust and violate ethical standards and potentially Idaho statutes regarding fair dealing. Finally, an approach that involves discouraging clients from investing altogether due to perceived market downturns, without a thorough analysis of their individual circumstances and long-term goals, is also professionally unsound. While caution is warranted, a blanket discouragement based on a broker's personal market outlook, without objective justification tied to the client's specific situation, fails to provide comprehensive guidance and may prevent clients from pursuing legitimate investment opportunities that align with their objectives. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client welfare, transparency, and adherence to all applicable Idaho real estate laws and ethical codes. This involves continuous education on market dynamics, understanding the client's unique financial profile, and communicating potential risks and rewards with complete honesty. When faced with market uncertainty, the focus should always be on providing objective, client-centric advice that supports informed decision-making, rather than attempting to predict or manipulate market movements. Question 8. Examination of the data shows that a property listed for sale in Boise, Idaho, is being marketed by a real estate licensee. The seller has indicated that they own the property outright and can sell it to whomever they wish. The licensee has not reviewed the title report or deed, but is proceeding with advertising the property as fee simple ownership, as this is the most common form of ownership in the area. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee to ensure compliance with Idaho real estate regulations and ethical standards? Option A. Obtain and review the title report and deed to confirm the exact nature of the ownership interest before advertising the property as fee simple, and accurately disclose the confirmed ownership type to all potential buyers. Option B. Rely solely on the seller's verbal assurance of ownership and proceed with marketing the property as fee simple, assuming the seller is knowledgeable about their title. Option C. Proceed with advertising the property as fee simple, as the seller's statement and the commonality of this ownership type in Boise are sufficient indicators. Option D. Advertise the property using vague terms like owner's interest to avoid making a definitive statement about the ownership type until further clarification is obtained. The correct answer is A. Obtain and review the title report and deed to confirm the exact nature of the ownership interest before advertising the property as fee simple, and accurately disclose the confirmed ownership type to all potential buyers. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves navigating the complexities of property ownership types and the potential for misrepresentation or misunderstanding, which can lead to significant legal and ethical ramifications for a real estate licensee in Idaho. The core of the challenge lies in accurately identifying and communicating the nature of the ownership interest being conveyed, ensuring all parties understand their rights and obligations. A licensee must exercise due diligence and possess a thorough understanding of Idaho real estate law regarding property titles. The best professional approach involves diligently verifying the exact nature of the ownership interest being advertised and sold. This means reviewing all available documentation, including the title report and any existing deeds, to confirm whether the property is held in fee simple, as a leasehold estate, or under a form of co-ownership like joint tenancy or tenancy in common. The licensee must then accurately represent this ownership type to potential buyers, providing clear and unambiguous information that aligns with the legal documentation. This adherence to factual accuracy and transparency is mandated by Idaho's real estate licensing laws and ethical codes, which require licensees to act with honesty, integrity, and competence, and to avoid misrepresentation. An incorrect approach would be to assume the ownership type based on common practices or casual conversations with the seller without independent verification. This could lead to advertising the property inaccurately, potentially as fee simple when it is, for example, a long-term leasehold. Such misrepresentation violates Idaho's statutory requirements for truthful advertising and disclosure, and breaches the licensee's fiduciary duty to the buyer. Another incorrect approach would be to vaguely describe the ownership in marketing materials, hoping the buyer will conduct their own due diligence. While buyers are expected to perform their own investigations, licensees have an affirmative duty to provide accurate information and not to mislead. Failing to clearly state the ownership type or using ambiguous language can be construed as a form of misrepresentation under Idaho real estate regulations. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the seller's verbal assertion of ownership without any supporting documentation. Sellers may misunderstand their own ownership status or intentionally misrepresent it. A licensee's professional responsibility in Idaho requires them to verify critical information independently, especially concerning the nature of the property's title. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes verification, accuracy, and clear communication. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue, type of ownership. 2. Consulting relevant legal documentation, title reports, deeds. 3. Accurately translating legal information into understandable terms for clients. 4. Disclosing all material facts truthfully and without omission. 5. Adhering strictly to Idaho's real estate laws and ethical standards. Question 9. Research into a property listing in Boise, Idaho, reveals that the seller, who is eager to sell quickly, has expressed frustration with a neighbor's long-standing use of a narrow strip of the property for access to their backyard. The seller instructs the real estate licensee to immediately erect a fence along the entire property line, effectively blocking the neighbor's access, and then proceed with marketing the property as if the access issue does not exist. What is the most ethical and legally sound course of action for the licensee in Idaho? Option A. Agree to the seller's request and assist in constructing the fence, then market the property without mentioning the neighbor's historical access. Option B. Clearly explain to the seller that erecting a fence to block the neighbor's established access would violate the neighbor's legal rights and advise against such action, while also educating the seller on the nature and implications of the existing easement. Option C. Proceed with marketing the property without addressing the seller's request to erect a fence, assuming the seller will handle the situation independently. Option D. Advise the seller that as the owner, they have the right to do as they please with their property and can ignore the neighbor's access. The correct answer is B. Clearly explain to the seller that erecting a fence to block the neighbor's established access would violate the neighbor's legal rights and advise against such action, while also educating the seller on the nature and implications of the existing easement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate a conflict between a client's immediate desires and the legal realities of property rights in Idaho. The licensee must uphold their fiduciary duties, while also ensuring all parties understand the limitations imposed by existing easements. The core of the challenge lies in balancing client satisfaction with ethical and legal compliance, specifically regarding the recognition and respect of established property rights. The best professional approach involves clearly and comprehensively explaining to the seller that the existing, recorded easement grants the neighbor a legal right to use a portion of the property for access. This explanation should include advising the seller that they cannot unilaterally obstruct or interfere with the neighbor's established easement rights. The licensee must educate the seller on the legal implications of such an action, emphasizing that attempting to block the easement would likely lead to legal disputes, potential court orders to remove the obstruction, and financial penalties. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the seller's request with accurate information about Idaho property law concerning easements, upholding the licensee's duty of honesty and diligence to their client, while respecting the legal rights of the third party. It prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct over a potentially harmful, albeit client-pleasing, immediate action. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the seller's request and assist in placing barriers or obstructions on the disputed area. This would violate the licensee's duty to act with integrity and honesty, as they would be facilitating an action that infringes upon a legally recognized property right. Such conduct could lead to disciplinary action from the Idaho Real Estate Commission, civil liability for damages, and damage to the licensee's professional reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the seller's request and proceed with marketing the property without addressing the easement issue. While not actively facilitating the obstruction, this passive approach fails to adequately inform the seller of their legal obligations and the potential consequences of their desired actions. It neglects the licensee's duty to provide competent advice and to ensure all parties understand the material facts affecting the property. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to advise the seller that they can simply ignore the easement because they are the current owner. This is fundamentally flawed as it misrepresents Idaho law regarding easements. Easements are legally binding rights that run with the land, meaning they bind future owners as well. Advising the seller to disregard a valid easement is unethical, illegal, and exposes both the seller and the licensee to significant legal repercussions. Professionals should approach such situations by first thoroughly understanding the nature of the property rights in question, including any recorded easements or encumbrances. They must then communicate this information clearly and factually to their client, explaining the legal implications and potential consequences of various actions. The decision-making process should prioritize legal compliance, ethical obligations, and the protection of all parties' rights, even when it means delivering unwelcome news to a client. Question 10. A real estate licensee in Boise, Idaho, is representing a buyer interested in purchasing a vacant parcel of land for a multi-unit residential development. The buyer has provided an estimated construction cost of $250,000 per unit. The parcel is zoned R3, multifamily residential, and has a minimum lot area requirement of 5,000 square feet per dwelling unit. The parcel is 0.5 acres in size. Which approach would be most prudent for the licensee to advise the buyer regarding the financial feasibility of the development, considering the zoning laws and land use regulations of Boise, Idaho? Option A. Advise the buyer to proceed with development based on the buyer's estimated construction cost per unit, assuming the R3 zoning will accommodate a reasonable number of units without specific calculation. Option B. Calculate the maximum number of dwelling units permitted by the R3 zoning based on the parcel size and minimum lot area requirement. Then multiply this by the buyer's estimated cost per unit to determine the total construction cost for feasibility analysis. Option C. Rely on the seller's verbal assurances that the parcel is suitable for a high-density development and proceed with financial projections based on those assurances. Option D. Focus the feasibility analysis primarily on the potential market resale value of the completed development, with only a cursory review of the construction costs. The correct answer is B. Calculate the maximum number of dwelling units permitted by the R3 zoning based on the parcel size and minimum lot area requirement. Then multiply this by the buyer's estimated cost per unit to determine the total construction cost for feasibility analysis. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee to not only understand the financial implications of zoning regulations, but also to accurately calculate potential development costs and returns based on those regulations. Misinterpreting zoning or miscalculating development costs can lead to significant financial losses for the client and potential liability for the licensee. Adhering to Idaho's specific zoning laws and land use regulations is paramount. The best approach involves a thorough analysis of the proposed development's compliance with the specific zoning ordinances of the City of Boise, including setback requirements, lot coverage, and permitted uses, and then calculating the maximum number of units allowed based on these constraints. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal limitations imposed by zoning, which are the primary determinants of what can be built. By calculating the maximum allowable units and then estimating construction costs per unit, the licensee can provide a realistic financial projection. For example, if the zoning allows for a maximum of 10 units on the parcel, and the estimated construction cost per unit is $250,000, the total construction cost would be > 10 > times > $250,000 equals > $2,500,000 / This forms the basis for a sound financial feasibility study. An incorrect approach would be to simply estimate the total construction cost based on a general market rate without first determining the number of units permitted by zoning. This fails to account for the fundamental legal restrictions that dictate the scale of the project. For instance, if the licensee estimates a total construction cost of $2,000,000 without verifying the number of units allowed, they might be projecting costs for a project that is not legally permissible under Boise's zoning code. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the potential market value of the completed development without a detailed cost analysis tied to zoning compliance. This ignores the critical aspect of feasibility and could lead to advising a client on a project that is financially unviable due to construction costs exceeding potential revenue within the zoning limitations. A further incorrect approach would be to rely on the seller's unsubstantiated claims about development potential without independent verification. This is a failure to exercise due diligence and could expose the licensee and client to significant risks if the seller's claims are inaccurate regarding zoning or development feasibility. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and applying local zoning ordinances first. This involves 1. Identifying the specific zoning district and its regulations for the subject property in Boise. 2. Determining the maximum number of units or square footage allowed based on lot size, setbacks, height restrictions, and other relevant zoning parameters. 3. Estimating construction costs on a per unit or per square foot basis, adjusted for the specific number of units or size determined in Step 2. 4. Projecting potential revenue and conducting a feasibility analysis. Question 11. System analysis indicates a property owner in Boise, Idaho, engaged a real estate broker to manage a rental property. The property was leased to a tenant under a 1-year fixed-term lease agreement that expired on March 31st. The tenant remained in possession of the property after March 31st, and the property owner continued to accept the monthly rent payments. The broker is now advising the property owner on the legal status of the tenancy. Which of the following approaches best reflects the legal situation under Idaho law? Option A. The property owner can immediately initiate eviction proceedings against the tenant for remaining in possession after the lease expiration. Option B. The original fixed-term lease has automatically renewed for another full 1-year term under the same conditions. Option C. The tenancy has converted to a month-to-month tenancy, with the original lease terms generally continuing, subject to the month-to-month duration and notice requirements for termination. Option D. The tenant is now a holdover tenant with no rights or obligations under the expired lease agreement. The correct answer is C. The tenancy has converted to a month-to-month tenancy, with the original lease terms generally continuing, subject to the month-to-month duration and notice requirements for termination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Idaho to navigate the nuances of lease agreements, specifically distinguishing between a fixed-term lease and a month-to-month tenancy, and understanding the implications of a tenant's continued occupancy after the lease expiration without a new agreement. A misinterpretation can lead to legal disputes, financial losses for either party, and potential disciplinary action for the broker. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Idaho's landlord-tenant laws and to protect the interests of both the landlord and the tenant. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recognizing that when a fixed-term lease expires in Idaho and the tenant remains in possession without a new written agreement, the tenancy typically converts to a month-to-month tenancy, provided rent continues to be paid and accepted. This is governed by Idaho law, which presumes this conversion unless otherwise stipulated in the original lease or a new agreement is reached. The broker should advise the landlord that the original terms regarding rent and other conditions generally continue, but the lease duration is now month-to-month, requiring proper notice for termination. Incorrect approaches analysis. Advising the landlord that the original fixed-term lease automatically renews for another full term is incorrect because Idaho law does not automatically renew a fixed-term lease in this situation. This would misrepresent the legal status of the tenancy and could lead to the landlord expecting terms that are no longer legally binding for the extended period. Suggesting that the tenant is now a holdover tenant with no rights or obligations under the original lease is also incorrect. While the fixed term has ended, the tenant's continued occupancy with the landlord's implied consent, by accepting rent, establishes a new tenancy, albeit month-to-month, with associated rights and obligations. Recommending that the landlord immediately initiate eviction proceedings without proper notice, based solely on the expiration of the fixed term, is premature and legally unsound. Idaho law requires specific notice periods for terminating a month-to-month tenancy, and an eviction cannot proceed without fulfilling these requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the specific legal framework of Idaho. This involves 1. Identifying the governing law Idaho landlord-tenant statutes. 2. Analyzing the facts presented: lease expiration, continued occupancy, rent payment. 3. Determining the legal status of the tenancy based on the law and facts. 4. Advising the client landlord on the legally accurate status and the required steps for managing the tenancy, including proper notice procedures for termination or modification. This systematic approach ensures compliance and ethical practice. Question 12. Process analysis reveals that a seller in Boise, Idaho, wishes to offer seller financing to a prospective buyer to expedite the sale of their property. The seller has proposed a simple interest rate and a balloon payment structure. As an Idaho real estate licensee, what is the most prudent course of action to ensure a compliant and ethical transaction? Option A. Draft a promissory note and deed of trust using a standard online template. This is a common practice for seller financing. Option B. Advise the seller to consult with a real estate attorney to draft the promissory note and deed of trust, and encourage the buyer to seek independent legal and financial advice, while ensuring all required disclosures are made. Option C. Focus solely on the purchase price and closing date, assuming the seller and buyer will handle all financing details independently after the contract is signed. Option D. Proceed with the transaction by having the seller and buyer sign a simple addendum to the purchase agreement outlining the basic interest rate and balloon payment, without formal loan documents. The correct answer is B. Advise the seller to consult with a real estate attorney to draft the promissory note and deed of trust, and encourage the buyer to seek independent legal and financial advice, while ensuring all required disclosures are made. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee in Idaho to navigate the complexities of seller financing, while ensuring compliance with both state and federal regulations designed to protect consumers and maintain market integrity. The licensee must balance the seller's desire for a quick sale with the buyer's need for clear, legally sound financing terms, all while adhering to disclosure requirements and avoiding predatory lending practices. Missteps can lead to significant legal repercussions, financial penalties, and damage to the licensee's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the licensee acting as a facilitator and educator, ensuring all parties understand the implications of seller financing, and that the transaction is structured in a legally compliant manner. This includes advising the seller to obtain independent legal counsel to draft the promissory note and deed of trust, and encouraging the buyer to seek independent legal and financial advice. The licensee should also ensure that all disclosures required by Idaho law, particularly those related to loan terms and the buyer's ability to repay, are made accurately and in a timely fashion. This approach prioritizes transparency, legal compliance, and the protection of both parties, aligning with the ethical obligations of an Idaho real estate licensee to act with honesty and integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is for the licensee to draft the promissory note and deed of trust themselves, using a generic template without consulting an attorney. This is problematic because it constitutes the unlicensed practice of law, a violation of Idaho statutes. Furthermore, generic templates may not adequately address the specific nuances of the transaction or comply with current Idaho lending regulations, potentially exposing both the seller and the licensee to legal liability. Another incorrect approach is to downplay the importance of a formal loan agreement and simply rely on a handshake deal or a brief addendum to the purchase agreement. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Idaho law requires clear, written documentation for all aspects of a real estate transaction, especially financing. The absence of a properly executed promissory note and deed of trust creates ambiguity, makes enforcement difficult, and fails to provide the necessary protections for both the buyer and the seller, potentially leading to disputes and legal battles. It also bypasses crucial disclosure requirements. A third incorrect approach is to pressure the buyer into accepting terms that may be unfavorable or beyond their financial capacity, solely to close the deal. This constitutes unethical conduct and potentially predatory lending, which is prohibited under various consumer protection laws. An Idaho licensee has a duty to ensure that the transaction is fair and that the buyer is not being exploited, especially when the financing is being provided by the seller. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Idaho should approach seller financing by first understanding the specific needs and capabilities of both the buyer and the seller. They must then prioritize compliance with Idaho's real estate licensing laws, contract laws, and any applicable federal lending regulations. This involves clearly defining their role as a facilitator and advisor, not as a legal or financial expert, unless properly licensed in those capacities. The process should always involve recommending that both parties seek independent legal and financial counsel to ensure the transaction is structured correctly and all parties are protected. Transparency and thorough documentation are paramount. Question 13. Governance review demonstrates that a real estate broker in Boise, Idaho, is advising clients on market trends. The broker has observed a recent increase in local employment figures and a slight dip in mortgage interest rates. Considering the potential impact of these economic factors on the Boise real estate market, which of the following approaches best reflects responsible and compliant professional practice according to Idaho's real estate regulations? Option A. Use speculative language such as "prices are set to explode" to motivate clients to act quickly in the market, without providing a detailed analysis of the underlying economic drivers. Option B. Inform clients that broad economic factors have minimal impact on real estate values, and that only recent comparable sales should be considered when making pricing or purchasing decisions. Option C. Advise clients that the recent increase in employment figures guarantees a significant and rapid rise in property values across Boise, encouraging immediate buying or selling decisions based on this singular indicator. Option D. Analyze current and projected economic indicators relevant to the Boise metropolitan area, including interest rates, employment growth, and housing inventory, and use this comprehensive assessment to provide clients with a realistic outlook on market conditions and potential future price movements, emphasizing that these are projections based on data. The correct answer is D. Analyze current and projected economic indicators relevant to the Boise metropolitan area, including interest rates, employment growth, and housing inventory, and use this comprehensive assessment to provide clients with a realistic outlook on market conditions and potential future price movements, emphasizing that these are projections based on data. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Idaho to navigate the complexities of economic indicators and their potential impact on market value, while simultaneously upholding their fiduciary duties to clients and adhering to Idaho's real estate regulations. The broker must balance providing informed advice with avoiding speculative or misleading statements that could violate professional standards or Idaho code. The best approach involves a thorough analysis of current and projected economic factors relevant to the Boise metropolitan area, such as interest rate trends, employment growth, housing inventory levels, and local development projects. This analysis should then be used to provide clients with a realistic assessment of market conditions and potential future price movements, emphasizing that these are projections based on available data and not guarantees. This aligns with the Idaho Real Estate License Law, Idaho Code Title 54, Chapter 20, which mandates licensees to exercise reasonable care and diligence and to present a true picture in advertising and representations. Ethical practice also dictates transparency about the inherent uncertainties in economic forecasting. An incorrect approach would be to make definitive predictions about future price increases based on a single economic indicator, such as a recent uptick in consumer confidence. This is problematic because it oversimplifies complex market dynamics and presents a potentially misleading picture, violating the duty of care and honesty required by Idaho real estate law. Such a prediction could lead a seller to overprice their property or a buyer to overpay, resulting in financial harm and potential legal recourse. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the impact of economic factors altogether and rely solely on recent comparable sales. While comparable sales are crucial, ignoring broader economic trends that influence demand, supply, and affordability would be a failure to exercise reasonable diligence. Economic shifts can significantly alter the relevance of past sales data and create a market that is either appreciating or depreciating more rapidly than historical data suggests. This oversight could lead to inaccurate valuations and poor client advice. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to engage in speculative language that encourages clients to make decisions based on anticipated market booms without a grounded analysis. This could involve phrases like "prices are guaranteed to skyrocket" or "now is the absolute best time to buy/sell, no matter what." Such statements are not only unprofessional, but also potentially violate Idaho's regulations against misrepresentation and fraudulent practices, as they lack factual basis and could be construed as inducing action through false pretenses. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data-driven analysis, client education, and ethical conduct. This involves staying informed about economic indicators, understanding their potential implications for the local Idaho market, and communicating these insights to clients in a clear, objective, and responsible manner. The focus should always be on empowering clients with accurate information to make informed decisions, rather than on making speculative pronouncements. Question 14. Governance review demonstrates that a real estate broker in Idaho is handling a loan application for a client who has expressed a strong desire for a specific loan amount to purchase a property. The client has provided initial financial documentation, but the broker notices some inconsistencies and a high debt-to-income ratio that, while potentially within the lender's stated guidelines, raises concerns about the client's long-term ability to manage the monthly payments. What is the most responsible course of action for the broker to take in this situation, adhering to Idaho's regulatory framework for loan underwriting and approval processes? Option A. Proceed with submitting the loan application to the lender as requested by the client, focusing on meeting the client's desired loan amount and assuming the lender's pre-approval process will adequately address any repayment concerns. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment, including verifying all financial documentation, analyzing the client's debt-to-income ratio in the context of their overall financial stability, and advising the client on the potential risks and benefits of proceeding with the loan based on their capacity to repay. Option C. Prioritize facilitating the transaction by downplaying the observed financial inconsistencies and high debt-to-income ratio to the client and the lender, emphasizing only the positive aspects of the client's application to ensure loan approval. Option D. Advise the client that their current financial situation may not support the desired loan amount and suggest they seek a smaller loan or delay their purchase until their financial standing improves, without conducting a deeper independent analysis of their repayment capacity. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment, including verifying all financial documentation, analyzing the client's debt-to-income ratio in the context of their overall financial stability, and advising the client on the potential risks and benefits of proceeding with the loan based on their capacity to repay. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a broker to balance the client's immediate financial needs with the long-term viability and ethical implications of a loan approval. The broker must act as a fiduciary, ensuring the client's best interests are protected, which includes not facilitating a loan that is demonstrably unmanageable. The Idaho Real Estate License Law and associated rules emphasize honesty, integrity, and fair dealing, as well as the responsibility to avoid misrepresentation and to ensure that transactions are sound and not based on false pretenses. The best approach involves a thorough risk assessment that prioritizes the borrower's ability to repay. This includes a comprehensive review of the borrower's financial documentation, verification of income and employment, and an evaluation of their debt-to-income ratio and credit history. The goal is to determine if the loan terms are sustainable for the borrower over the life of the loan. Aligning with the Idaho Real Estate License, laws mandate to conduct business with honesty and to avoid practices that could lead to financial harm for consumers. This approach ensures that the broker is not merely facilitating a transaction, but is acting responsibly to protect the client from potential default and its consequences. An approach that focuses solely on meeting the borrower's stated loan amount request without a rigorous assessment of their repayment capacity is ethically and regulatorily flawed. This could lead to the borrower defaulting on the loan, resulting in significant financial distress, damage to their credit, and potential foreclosure. Such an action would violate the duty of honesty and fair dealing required by Idaho law. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the lender's initial pre-approval without independent verification of the borrower's financial stability. While pre-approvals are a starting point, they are not a guarantee of final approval, and a responsible broker must ensure all underlying financial information is sound and that the borrower can realistically manage the loan payments. Overlooking this due diligence can lead to a transaction that ultimately harms the borrower, contravening the broker's fiduciary duties. Finally, an approach that prioritizes closing the deal above all else, even if it means overlooking red flags in the borrower's financial situation, is unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of integrity and a failure to uphold the professional standards expected of a licensed real estate broker in Idaho. The professional decision-making process should always begin with a clear understanding of the client's financial well-being and the long-term implications of the loan, followed by a diligent and honest assessment of their ability to meet their obligations, all within the framework of Idaho's real estate regulations. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that a real estate broker in Idaho has received a bona fide offer on a seller's property. The seller, upon hearing the offer's terms, instructs the broker not to present it, stating a personal preference against the potential buyer. What is the broker's most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Idaho real estate regulations and professional ethics? Option A. Disregard the offer entirely, assuming the seller's initial sentiment overrides the need for formal presentation. Option B. Present the offer but subtly steer the seller away from accepting it without providing explicit legal justification. Option C. Immediately refuse to present the offer as per the seller's direct instruction to avoid potential conflict. Option D. Advise the seller that all bona fide offers must be presented and explain the legal and ethical implications of not doing so, including fair housing considerations. Correct answer is D. Advise the seller that all bona fide offers must be presented and explain the legal and ethical implications of not doing so, including fair housing considerations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the broker must navigate a situation where a client's expressed desire conflicts with potential legal and ethical obligations. The broker's fiduciary duty to the seller requires them to present all offers, but they also have a duty to advise the seller on the implications of their decisions, especially when those decisions might be based on incomplete or potentially discriminatory information. The broker must balance the client's instructions with their professional responsibilities under Idaho real estate law and ethical standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the broker advising the seller that they are legally obligated to present all offers, regardless of the broker's personal opinion or the seller's initial instructions. The broker should explain that refusing to present a bona fide offer could violate Idaho's real estate licensing laws and potentially lead to disciplinary action. Furthermore, the broker should educate the seller on fair housing laws, emphasizing that discrimination in real estate transactions is illegal and unethical. The broker's role is to facilitate the transaction while ensuring compliance with all applicable laws and ethical guidelines, which includes presenting all offers and advising the seller on the legal ramifications of their choices. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately refuse to present the offer based on the seller's verbal instruction. This directly violates the broker's fiduciary duty to their client and the legal requirement to present all offers. It also risks violating fair housing laws if the refusal is based on protected characteristics. Another incorrect approach is to present the offer but subtly discourage the seller from accepting it without a clear, legally justifiable reason. This misrepresents the broker's duty of loyalty and could be seen as acting against the seller's best interests, potentially leading to a breach of contract or ethical violation. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the offer entirely, assuming the seller's initial sentiment means it's not worth presenting. This is a severe dereliction of duty, failing to uphold the broker's legal and ethical obligations to their client, and potentially exposing both the broker and the seller to legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing legal compliance and ethical conduct. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying all legal and ethical obligations relevant to the situation, e.g., fiduciary duties, fair housing laws, Idaho Real Estate Commission rules. 2. Clearly communicating these obligations to the client. 3. Advising the client on the consequences of different courses of action. 4. Documenting all advice given and decisions made. 5. Acting in the client's best interest while strictly adhering to all professional standards. Question 16. Operational review demonstrates that a licensed real estate broker in Idaho has been working with a seller to list their property. During the listing period, the broker also develops a relationship with a potential buyer who expresses strong interest in the seller's property. The broker believes they can effectively represent both parties in this transaction. What is the most appropriate course of action for the broker to take in accordance with Idaho real estate brokerage regulations? Option A. Proceed with representing both parties without any disclosure, assuming the broker can maintain neutrality and facilitate the transaction efficiently. Option B. Disclose the dual agency situation only to the seller, as they are the broker's current client, and proceed with the transaction. Option C. Facilitate the sale to the buyer without formally disclosing dual agency, but ensure the buyer is aware of the broker's relationship with the seller. Option D. Immediately disclose the dual agency situation to both the seller and the potential buyer, and obtain their informed written consent to proceed with representing both parties. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the dual agency situation to both the seller and the potential buyer, and obtain their informed written consent to proceed with representing both parties. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a broker to navigate a potential conflict of interest and ensure compliance with Idaho's real estate brokerage laws, specifically concerning agency relationships and disclosure. The broker must act with integrity and transparency to protect both the seller's and the potential buyer's interests, while also adhering to their fiduciary duties. Failure to do so could result in disciplinary action from the Idaho Real Estate Commission, civil liability, and damage to the broker's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately disclosing the dual agency situation to both parties and obtaining their informed written consent to proceed. Idaho law, under Title 54, Chapter 29 of the Idaho Code, mandates that a real estate broker acting as a dual agent must obtain written consent from all parties involved. This approach ensures transparency, allows clients to make informed decisions about whether they are comfortable with the arrangement, and fulfills the broker's legal and ethical obligations to avoid undisclosed conflicts of interest. By obtaining consent, the broker establishes a clear understanding of their role and limitations in representing both sides. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with representing both parties without any disclosure, assuming that the broker can remain neutral. This violates Idaho Code 54-2916, which requires disclosure of agency relationships. Failing to disclose dual agency is a breach of trust and can lead to legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach is to disclose the dual agency to only one party. This is insufficient under Idaho law, as both parties must be informed and provide consent. This selective disclosure creates an unfair advantage and undermines the principle of informed consent for all involved parties. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to represent only the seller while facilitating the sale to a buyer the broker has a pre-existing relationship with, without formal disclosure of the dual agency. While not explicitly a dual agency situation in the traditional sense, the pre-existing relationship creates a potential conflict of interest that should be disclosed to the seller to ensure they are aware of any perceived or actual bias. Idaho's emphasis on disclosure and avoiding conflicts of interest would still necessitate transparency in such a scenario. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize transparency and informed consent when potential conflicts of interest arise. The decision-making process should begin with identifying any situation where a broker's loyalty or objectivity might be compromised. Following this identification, the broker must consult the relevant Idaho statutes and commission rules to understand their specific obligations. The paramount principle is to ensure all parties are fully aware of the situation and have the opportunity to consent, or to seek independent representation if they choose. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client is exploring financing options for an investment property in Idaho, specifically considering hard money loans and seller financing. What is the most prudent and ethically sound approach for an Idaho licensed real estate broker to take in advising this client? Option A. Advise the client that both hard money loans and seller financing are generally riskier than conventional mortgages, and suggest they abandon these options in favor of traditional bank loans. Option B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client about the specific terms, risks, and potential costs of both hard money loans and seller financing, emphasizing the need for independent legal and financial counsel for each option. Option C. Strongly advocate for the hard money loan option, highlighting its speed of funding as the primary benefit for an investor seeking a quick acquisition. Option D. Present seller financing as a straightforward and less complex alternative to traditional mortgages, downplaying any potential risks or complexities involved. The correct answer is B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client about the specific terms, risks, and potential costs of both hard money loans and seller financing, emphasizing the need for independent legal and financial counsel for each option. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Idaho real estate broker because it involves advising a client on financing options that carry significant risks and require a thorough understanding of both the client's financial capacity and the specific legal and ethical obligations of a broker. Hard money loans and seller financing, while potentially viable, are not standard mortgage products and can expose borrowers to higher costs and less favorable terms if not structured carefully. The broker must navigate these complexities while adhering to Idaho's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards, ensuring the client's best interests are prioritized and that no misrepresentation or undue influence occurs. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive discussion with the client about the nature, risks, and potential costs associated with both hard money loans and seller financing. This includes clearly explaining that hard money loans are typically short-term, asset-based loans with higher interest rates and fees, often used for distressed properties or quick acquisitions, and that seller financing involves the seller acting as the lender, which can have implications for the seller's financial position and the buyer's loan terms. The broker should encourage the client to seek independent legal and financial advice to fully understand the implications of each option before committing. This approach aligns with Idaho's real estate regulations, which mandate that licensees act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interest of their clients, avoiding misrepresentation and ensuring clients are fully informed about material facts, including financing terms and associated risks. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending a hard money loan without thoroughly explaining its high interest rates, short repayment terms, and potential for foreclosure if payments are missed is a failure to disclose material risks, violating Idaho's duty of honesty and integrity. Similarly, presenting seller financing as a simple alternative without discussing the potential for the seller to retain a security interest in the property, the specific terms of repayment, or the need for a formal promissory note and deed of trust would be a misrepresentation of the complexity and potential pitfalls. Advising the client that either option is a guaranteed solution without a full disclosure of the associated risks and the need for independent professional advice constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and potentially violates Idaho's real estate advertising and disclosure laws if presented as a simple or risk-free transaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach financing discussions by first understanding the client's financial situation, goals, and risk tolerance. They should then present a spectrum of available options, clearly delineating the characteristics, benefits, and, crucially, the risks of each. For non-traditional financing like hard money or seller financing, the emphasis must be on education and risk disclosure, strongly recommending independent legal and financial counsel. This ensures informed consent and protects both the client and the broker from potential liability and ethical breaches. Question 18. Operational review demonstrates that a licensed real estate broker in Idaho, who has been exclusively representing a seller in listing their property, is approached by a potential buyer who expresses strong interest in purchasing that same property. The broker has not previously worked with this buyer. What is the broker's immediate and most critical obligation under Idaho real estate law? Option A. Immediately disclose the dual agency relationship to both the seller and the buyer and obtain their informed written consent before proceeding with any further negotiations or actions related to the transaction. Option B. Inform only the seller of the buyer's interest and advise them on how to proceed, without disclosing the potential dual agency to the buyer. Option C. Inform only the buyer that the property is listed by their firm and that they represent the seller, but proceed to negotiate the terms as if they were a transactional facilitator, without formal dual agency disclosure. Option D. Proceed with presenting the buyer's offer to the seller, assuming that the seller's existing agency agreement implicitly allows for such representation. Correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the dual agency relationship to both the seller and the buyer, and obtain their informed written consent before proceeding with any further negotiations or actions related to the transaction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict of interest arising from a real estate agent representing both the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. Navigating this situation requires strict adherence to Idaho's agency disclosure laws and ethical obligations to ensure fairness and transparency for all parties. Failure to do so can lead to legal repercussions, loss of license, and damage to professional reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to immediately disclose the dual agency relationship to both the seller and the buyer. This approach involves obtaining informed written consent from both parties before proceeding with the transaction. Idaho law, specifically Idaho Code Title 54, Chapter 20, mandates that real estate licensees owe specific duties to clients and customers. When a dual agency situation arises, the licensee must clearly explain the implications of this relationship, including the limitations on their ability to advocate for each party's individual interests. Obtaining written consent confirms that both parties understand and agree to the arrangement, thereby fulfilling the licensee's duty of disclosure and consent. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the transaction without informing either party of the dual agency. This violates Idaho's disclosure requirements and the fundamental duty of honesty and fair dealing owed to all parties. It creates a situation where one or both parties are unaware of the agent's divided loyalties, potentially leading to them not receiving full representation. Another incorrect approach is to inform only one party about the dual agency. This is also a violation of disclosure laws. Both the seller and the buyer have a right to know the agent's role and potential conflicts of interest. Failing to disclose to one party is as detrimental as failing to disclose to both. A third incorrect approach is to assume that because the agent has previously worked with one of the parties, disclosure is not necessary. Agency relationships are transaction-specific. Even with a prior relationship, a new transaction involving a dual agency requires a fresh disclosure and consent process to ensure compliance with current Idaho regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and legal compliance. Upon recognizing a potential dual agency situation, the immediate step is to pause and assess the implications. The next step is to consult the relevant Idaho statutes and regulations concerning agency relationships. The core of the decision-making process should be to prioritize obtaining informed, written consent from all parties involved before any further action is taken in the transaction. If consent cannot be obtained, or if the agent feels unable to ethically represent both parties. The professional course of action is to withdraw from representing one or both parties. Question 19. The assessment process reveals that a licensed real estate broker in Idaho is facilitating the sale of a property. The seller has verbally agreed to a price and terms with a buyer, and both parties express enthusiasm for the transaction. However, the broker has not yet drafted a formal written purchase agreement, instead relying on the verbal understanding and intending to finalize the details later. Which approach best upholds the broker's professional and legal obligations in Idaho? Option A. Advise the seller and buyer that while verbal agreements are common, a written contract is not strictly necessary for the sale of real estate in Idaho, and they can proceed without one if they prefer. Option B. Focus on securing the earnest money deposit from the buyer, as this signifies a commitment to the transaction, and address the formal contract details after the deposit has been secured. Option C. Proceed with the transaction based on the verbal agreement, assuming the parties' enthusiasm indicates a binding understanding, and inform them that a formal document will be prepared at a later stage. Option D. Immediately draft a comprehensive written purchase agreement that clearly outlines all essential elements of the sale, including property description, price, terms, contingencies, and the names of all parties, ensuring both parties understand and agree to its contents before signing. The correct answer is D. Immediately draft a comprehensive written purchase agreement that clearly outlines all essential elements of the sale, including property description, price, terms, contingencies, and the names of all parties, ensuring both parties understand and agree to its contents before signing. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent ambiguity in contract interpretation and the potential for disputes arising from differing understandings of terms. Careful judgment is required to ensure all parties are acting in good faith and that the contract reflects a true meeting of the minds, adhering to Idaho's specific real estate laws. The best professional practice involves clearly identifying and documenting all essential elements of a valid real estate contract as defined by Idaho law, including offer, acceptance, consideration, legal capacity, and a legal purpose. This approach ensures that the contract is legally binding and enforceable, minimizing the risk of future litigation. Specifically, a licensed broker in Idaho must ensure that the agreement clearly outlines the property description, the price, the terms of sale, and the names of all parties involved. Furthermore, the broker has a duty to ensure that all parties understand the terms and have the legal capacity to enter into the agreement. This aligns with Idaho Code Title 54, Chapter 29, which governs real estate practices and emphasizes fair dealing and competent representation. An approach that focuses solely on obtaining a signature without verifying the clarity and completeness of the essential contract elements is professionally unacceptable. This failure to ensure all parties understand and agree to the terms, particularly regarding consideration and legal purpose, could render the contract voidable or unenforceable under Idaho law. It also violates the broker's fiduciary duty to their client and the broader ethical obligation to conduct business with honesty and integrity. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to assume that a verbal agreement constitutes a binding contract for the sale of real estate. Idaho's Statute of Frauds, as codified in Idaho Code Section 9-503, requires that contracts for the sale of real property be in writing to be enforceable. Relying on a verbal agreement disregards this fundamental legal requirement and exposes all parties to significant risk. Finally, proceeding with a contract where one party clearly lacks legal capacity, such as a minor or an individual deemed legally incompetent, is also professionally unacceptable. Idaho law requires all parties to a contract to have the legal capacity to enter into binding agreements. A broker's failure to ascertain and confirm this capacity can lead to a void or voidable contract and potential legal repercussions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a thorough understanding of Idaho's real estate statutes and contract law, diligent verification of all contract elements, clear and open communication with all parties, and a commitment to documenting all agreements in writing. When in doubt, seeking legal counsel is a prudent step to ensure compliance and protect all parties involved. Question 20. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for practical application scenarios regarding fair housing in Idaho. A real estate broker in Boise, Idaho, is representing a seller. The broker receives an offer from a buyer who has a strong pre-approval letter from a reputable lender, indicating they can afford the asking price. However, the broker overhears the buyer speaking in a language not native to the United States and assumes, without further investigation, that this buyer may have difficulty securing future financing or understanding complex closing documents due to their national origin. The broker then considers how to present this offer to the seller. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant action for the broker to take? Option A. Suggest to the seller that they should wait for a more suitable buyer, implying that the current buyer's family size might lead to future issues with the property or neighborhood. Option B. Withhold the buyer's pre-approval letter from the seller and present a lower offer from another buyer, claiming the first buyer was not financially qualified. Option C. Present the offer to the seller, highlighting the buyer's strong pre-approval letter and the objective financial terms of the offer, without making any assumptions or comments about the buyer's national origin or perceived language barriers. Option D. Advise the seller to reject the offer, stating that the buyer's perceived inability to secure financing due to their national origin makes them a risky prospect. The correct answer is C. Present the offer to the seller, highlighting the buyer's strong pre-approval letter and the objective financial terms of the offer, without making any assumptions or comments about the buyer's national origin or perceived language barriers. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Idaho to navigate the complexities of fair housing laws while simultaneously managing financial transactions and client expectations. The broker must balance the legal imperative to avoid discrimination with the practical need to secure a sale and earn a commission. Misinterpreting or misapplying fair housing principles can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and harm to protected classes. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are compliant and ethically sound. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a direct and transparent approach to the potential buyer's inquiry, focusing solely on the objective financial aspects of the property and the buyer's ability to secure financing. This means providing the seller with the buyer's pre-approval letter and any other relevant financial documentation that demonstrates their capacity to purchase, without making any assumptions or comments about the buyer's protected characteristics. The broker's role is to facilitate the transaction based on financial merit and adherence to the purchase agreement terms, not to influence the seller's decision based on discriminatory factors. Idaho's Fair Housing Act, mirroring federal law, prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, familial status, national origin, and disability. By focusing on the financial qualifications, the broker upholds these principles by treating all potential buyers equally and ensuring the seller's decision is based on legitimate business considerations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the broker advising the seller to reject the offer based on the buyer's perceived inability to secure financing due to their national origin. This is a direct violation of Idaho's Fair Housing Act and federal fair housing laws. The broker is making a discriminatory judgment about the buyer's financial capacity based on a protected characteristic, rather than evaluating the objective evidence of their pre-approval. This action constitutes steering and discrimination, leading to severe legal consequences. Another incorrect approach is for the broker to withhold the buyer's pre-approval letter from the seller and instead present a lower offer from another buyer, claiming the first buyer was not financially qualified. This is deceptive and discriminatory. The broker is actively concealing information that demonstrates the first buyer's financial capability and is attempting to manipulate the sale process based on discriminatory intent. This violates the broker's fiduciary duty to the seller and constitutes illegal discrimination under fair housing laws. A third incorrect approach involves the broker suggesting to the seller that they should wait for a more suitable buyer, because the current buyer's family size might lead to future issues with the property or neighborhood. This is a form of discrimination based on familial status, which is a protected class under fair housing laws. The broker is making assumptions and judgments about the buyer based on their family, rather than focusing on the objective terms of the offer and the buyer's financial qualifications. This is a clear instance of steering and discriminatory advice. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize adherence to fair housing laws and ethical conduct. When faced with a situation involving potential protected classes, the decision-making process should be guided by objective criteria and legal compliance. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific fair housing regulations applicable in Idaho. 2. Focusing solely on the financial qualifications and the terms of the offer, treating all buyers equally regardless of their protected characteristics. 3. Avoiding any assumptions, stereotypes, or personal biases that could influence professional judgment. 4. Maintaining open and honest communication with the seller, providing all relevant, objective information. 5. Consulting legal counsel or regulatory bodies if there is any uncertainty about compliance. The goal is to facilitate a fair and legal transaction, protecting both the client's interests and the integrity of the real estate profession.